before the president even made them. A 13 September 2001 Times CNN poll revealed that a surprising 78% of those polled suspected Saddam to be in some way responsible for 9/11. That's before Bush brought up that argument in public. In March 2003, initial enthusiasm for the war was strong, 72% pro, only 22% con. In fact, this correlates with continued belief that the Iraqi dictator bore responsibility for the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. A Washington Post poll published in September 6, 2003 reported 69% of those polled still believed it was least likely that Saddam Hussein was involved. Other charges, such as the allegation that Saddam had WMDs, were much trumpeted, but ultimately I think they were secondary, at least for the U.S. general population. Remember, I'm still out on that limb. Some who opposed the war, myself included, believe Saddam probably had some poison gas stores left over, but that in itself was not a compelling reason for war. Most notably, my personal hero, General Anthony Zinni, the impressive former commander of CENTCOM, who wrote such an intelligent op-ed in the New York Times earlier this week, went on record against invading Iraq, and the action he regarded was unnecessary. Charges as to Iraq's nuclear capacity were always more suspicious, although the Bush administration pushed them hard. Concern with the Iraqi nuclear program brought many over to Bush's side. That's true, but I remain skeptical regarding the importance of a WMD argument, even in its nuclear variant, in changing American popular willingness to go to war. And that support would later endure revelations that those WMD charges were unjustified. Support for the war, which did take a hit as the insurgency rose in late 2003 and 2004, remained at roughly 50-50 between March of 2005 and March of 2007, even though the president admitted in the middle of 2006 that he had been wrong about the existence of WMD. In other words, WMD did not affect later American feelings about the war. Americans were determined to get back at bin Laden, and Saddam made a convenient proxy. As it turned out, the invasion of Iraq and the armed occupation that followed worked to the advantage of al-Qaeda at least through 2006, and the verdict is still out on the ultimate effect. The International Institute for Strategic Studies listed in 2004 that the invasion of Iraq proved a great boon to al-Qaeda recruitment and fundraising. American actions provided recruiting tools. Need I even mention the horrific Abu Ghraib scandal that began to break in early 2004? Troubles in Fallujah, from the shootings of civilian demonstrators in April 2003 through the first major American offensive there a year later, alienated the Sunni community. Lieutenant General Sanchez, then commanding in Iraq, saw that offensive as a crucial watershed. To say that the Fallujah offensive angered the Sunni Muslims of Iraq would be a gross understatement, he said. The Sunni triangle exploded with violence. How did American actions in Afghanistan and Iraq support the al-Qaeda narrative of a Western war against Islam? Well, they justified dangerous fears within the Islamic world. The evidence bears this out. A book that I found extremely useful in the classroom, and I advise to those who deal with terrorism at all, is a book by Esposito and Magahed, which is called Who Speaks for Islam? This is not theory. These are public polls that were carried out over a long period of time in Islamic countries from Indonesia all the way to Morocco. Now, it's true that scholars of Middle East terrorism, such as Mary Hayback in her Know the Enemy, emphasize the arguments of present-day jihadists, which can be traced back at least to the 13th century writings of Taymiyyah. Hayback and others report that Islamists wish to return to fundamental Islam, frown on democracy as replacing divine Sharia law with the profane laws of men, and see an ongoing war of the West against Islam. In contrast to Hayback, Esposito and Magahed downplay the theoretical and theological literature of Islamic extremists, and emphasize the demonstrable public opinion of modern Muslim communities around the globe. The opinion they report contradicts several points made by scholars of radical Islam. For example, popular attitudes are much more favorable to democracy and opportunities for women, and the events of the last few weeks have made that fairly clear. When polled as to what they admired about the West, the most common responses across the Muslim world were technology, values of hard work, individual responsibility, rule of law, and cooperation, and fair democratic political rights, freedom of speech, and gender equality. However, when polled as to what they resented most about the West, the following three responses were most typical: sexual and cultural promiscuity, ethical and moral corruption, and hatred of Muslims. That's an Afghan protest against that idiotic burn the Koran day, which thank God didn't happen, but was threatened. They're protesting to American troops, as you can see. The authors also report a far less scientific example, the typical comments of a minivan driver in Cairo. America hates Islam. Look what they just did to Iraq. In his studies of modern Islamist terrorism, the highly regarded scholar Mark Sageman defines radicalization as a process of transforming individuals from rather unexceptional and ordinary beings into terrorists with the willingness to use violence for political ends. This process includes 4 prongs. I hate that term prongs, but the first 2 are a sense of moral outrage at apparent crimes against Muslims both globally and locally, and and a belief that moral violation is part of a larger war against Islam. Therefore, when the United States provides evidence that the Ummah can interpret as demonstrating a war against Islam, the U.S. is rallying support for radical Islamists. It is promoting the narrative by which individuals are transformed into terrorists. The precise role of radical Islam theology in the real world of Muslim terrorist groups can be debated. I personally regard elaborate religious convictions within fundamentalist Islam as less important a motivation for extremism than are assaults on Muslim worldviews and threats against populations who practice Islam. Studies of suicide bombing conducted by Robert Pape, for example, indicate that such extreme activities arise in resistance to the occupation